Welcome to Research Bay. This podcast profiles researchers across all fields, uncovering their work, methods, and impact. Whether it's science, social research, or creative studies, we break it down into engaging conversations. The Research Bay podcast. Big ideas made simple. Dr. Zuziwe Khuzwayo. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just, share with us who you are and what area of research are you in?
So, I am Dr. Zuziwe Khuzwayo, who recently just graduated with my PhD.
Yay!
Thank you. My focus and my research studies and my work that transcends from the research even outside is on gender and sexuality and how women and those who are gender non-conforming are able to construct their sexuality, looking at issues of race and class and space and how women's sexuality, whether straight or queer, is regulated, particularly in South Africa in public spaces. I look at that.
So if you can walk us through, some of the research studies that you've done. I'd say actually maybe your flagship studies.
Okay, so my flagship studies, one, I just come from a research background. So I was working at the HSRC, and working at the HSRC, I was very much so interested in issues of gender and race and how, particularly for queer people, how that gets constructed in South Africa and the new democracy and claiming and occupying space. Then when it was time for me to do my PhD, I wasn't quite too sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to be writing about women. I will not lie, I have a bias towards contributing to the canon of writing about women's experiences in multitudes, right? Whether it be women in labor, whether it be women in their sexuality, whether it be women in politics. I think that not enough work has been done on writing about women, and particularly Black women. So for me, my work is biased towards that. And so for me, when it came to picking my PhD and the things I was passionate about, I found that not a lot of work was being done on bisexual women, right? Women who were queer, but not necessarily lesbian or trans. And what does it really mean to be bisexual? And so one up front, I'm also a bisexual queer woman myself, so there was a bias towards that. And I was just having these experiences where people were either saying, oh no, you're just really a lesbian, this is just a phase. And you're like, no, I still find myself attracted to men, and women and both, and those who are non-conforming. I'm bisexual. And then I would just have these other experiences from lesbians who wouldn't want to be around me because historically bisexual women have been very violent. So there was a personal experience that came from it. But also I found when we're looking at women's sexuality, straight or queer, a lot of it, there's not enough. And delving into how women's sexuality gets regulated, whether it's how we dress, how we express ourselves, and then you add the elements of being queer and the racial elements of that. I wanted to really look deeper into that and show how queer women and Black queer women have always claimed space and they've occupied space, and they occupy space in these very different ways, which I think highlights how it's not a stock standard way of how you can occupy and claim space, and you can still be inclusive of other people and challenge the norm. So I did that PhD for over 6 years, working and studying. Try not to do that, everybody. Try not to. Working and studying is very hard, but if you have to, I totally understand. And for me, the findings were very interesting, right?
But you're not walking us through the methodology.
Oh.
So somebody's listening to you and saying, okay, how were you recruiting these participants?
Oh.
Were you using questionnaires?
Mm.
How are you learning about their experience? Yeah.
One of the things that really helped me, for one, was that I myself was a bisexual woman and a queer woman, and I had some queer friends, right? And I knew that I wanted to do a life histories approach to this work. I wanted to really sit and be in conversation with these individuals, because some were saying that they're non-gender and others were saying they're a woman. And I wanted just to get to know who they were and just have conversations with them. So it could be around coffee. There were others I had 2 or 3 conversations before. Just first of all, understanding them. I think we have to be honest as researchers that there's elements of this work that is going to be extractive. And for me, it's a power dynamic. And I claim that and I own that. But I think that there's a way in which in that power dynamic, you can still give respect to in the individual, and your practices can not necessarily make it an equal engagement, but can be one where the individual feels included and seen and heard. And so for me, my methodology really was about, okay, one, I was just struggling to find participants, but once I found them, right, through like snowball sampling and people helping me out, I would just sort of just first start and like, let's just have just a one-on-one conversation before we even, have the proper interview, right? And the interviews, of course, a questionnaire was developed, and I wanted it to be like semi-structured because I didn't want it to be like forced, like question 1, question 2, question 3. I don't like that. And I think it's very important to allow room and space to breathe. So sorry. When you're talking about someone's sexuality, because it's very personal, it's very, very private, right? And people need time to feel comfortable, to be able to share with you their experiences. So I would just have like I would introduce myself maybe via text or via phone call and be like, this is what I'm doing. Are you interested? And then it'd be like, yes. I was like, well, let's just have like a conversation, just a basic one, like a 20-minute coffee. Okay, cool. We'd have that. We'd talk about everything else besides the research because I wanted to get to know them. Then once I could feel that like slowly but surely they were understanding the research and there might have been some trust there because, again, that idea of trust, you're not going to have full trust, So like you're going to have some moments where you got to be comfortable with the fact that that power dynamic that happens between a researcher and a participant, I mean to say, you just got to be aware of that. Then I would have another conversation with them where I would start doing the proper interview. And we would go back, like, okay, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about, like, when's the first time that you recognized that you were not straight, that you just sort of knew that, no, I'm not only, if I was a woman, attracted to boys. I also like girls. What was that incident? How did it make you feel? Did you tell anybody else, right? What was your experience in telling somebody else, right? And, slowly from there, what I found is that people were willing to share and this and the other. And I must say I think I was very lucky. 2 things. One, I was slowly building like just trust and engagement with my participants. But also when I was doing my interviews, it was very challenging. It was like during the first year of COVID. So I think we were all thinking the world's going to end, so why do interviews or research? But after some time, when we recognized, okay, we're going to have to live through this, a lot of participants just wanted to share because they were just so isolated that they just wanted to like have somebody to communicate with. And for me, once I found that, when I found my participants, they were so willing to engage, so willing to share, and they were sharing some very not easy stories, yeah.
So what are some of the key findings that you found from the study?
Well, one of the key findings I'd like to start with is that I think when we're understanding sexuality, for me, I've come to realize that it's not just I'm born this way, as Lady Gaga would say, right? Your sexuality is actually made up of a lot of things. It's made up of a lot of internal and external factors. So the internal, yes, there's the desires that you have, right? But there's also external,
Sure,
right?
be careful now, hey, because you're really going against the... Yeah.
Yes, no, it's true. No, you can have those internal desires, but when it comes to your sexuality, it's also about your beliefs, it's your practices, it's also just about, how you view the world. It is, and when I say view the world, how you're understanding how you as a person fit in regards to your sexuality. So yes, you will have that intrinsic, your desires and your attractions, right? But I always say, people like to say like your desires are inherent in you and, nobody can tell you that. And it's like, well, that's not true. And a good example of that is, well, now we're currently seeing the end of the BBL, but like there was a period in society where like...
Are we seeing the end of the BBL?
Yes, we are. We're back to skinny with the Zempic. We're back to skinny and flat asses or small asses. We really are back to that, right? And for me, what I always say is that there has never been a single idea of what is desirable and beautiful in society. It has constantly been
Evolving,
changing.
yeah.
From whether it was Sarah Bartman, to whether it was the Marilyn Monroes, to whether it was the Kate Mosses, to now the Kim Kardashians, and now we're getting more, I don't know what we're going into, back to Kate Moss and the waif look. It's always constantly changing. And those internal desires that you have as a person, yes, exist, but they're influenced by all these other different factors, right? So it's not taking away that, yes, you are queer and you are attracted to someone maybe of the same sex as yourself, but a lot of that is also influenced by what's happening around you, you know. Even with the study that I found, like, I think we know it about it in 2000, you know, you would never say men having sex with men are gay, right? During the HIV pandemic, right? Because these men don't view themselves as being gay. Yes, they have sex with men, but they might be having relationships with women. They might be fathers and mothers and other things. And so your sexuality for them, it's like, no, I practice having sex with men, but I'm not gay. And so can you see how your sexuality is just more than what your desires and your attractions are? It's a whole host. It's your beliefs. It's how you view yourself, how the world views you. It's a whole host of other things. And so for me, that's the one thing that I found, that sexuality is not as stagnant as we think we are. I also found that for me, for Black women, it's it's very, very interesting. So in doing my study, and particularly in South Africa, we must say this, I found that there's a way in which I think for all women, our sexuality is regulated in public because we live in a white supremacist, patriarchal, heterocapitalist system. And I hope you can all understand that, God willing.
No. Please repeat that.
Okay.
Patriarchal?
So patriarchal is the patriarchy that exists in society that favors men, that men are better. Capitalism is, unfortunately, the time that we find ourselves now, where everything is for profit, regardless of whether it's exploitation to the climate or it's exploitation to workers or people of color or continents such as ourselves as Africa. And the white supremacy, of course, is that being the white race is the most dominant, right? So when you are a Black person and you are a Black woman, or you and the heteronormativity, so sorry, is the idea that heterosexuality is the only sexuality, that you must only be attracted to your opposite sex or your opposite gender.
Or that it's the normal.
It's the norm. That's the norm. It's heteronormativity.
And anything that's not that is
bad.
abnormal.
It's not normal. It's not good. So when you are a person who's queer, right, and you are being met with these different sort of structures of influence that are very oppressive towards you, what I found is that for like Black women, there's just a way in which the way that they think about violence publicly is very, very different from white women, right? And that like my participants, I would say to them, you know, are you publicly affectionate with your partners? And they go, no, I don't do that. I don't do that in public. We haven't got time for that because you don't know who's who or what is in the zoo. And it's right here, it's front of center. Where for white women, I found that for them, it was like this abstract thing. They understand that, yes, the violence can occur towards women. But for them, even as queer women, no, like it's over there. Like it's not really going to happen to me. It's over there. It's not here.
So interesting, you know? Because I think the idea that we're fed is that white women are so scared all the time. And what you're saying is that Black women are intrinsically more scared, even if not showing it all. It
is the way in which you're trained and you're socialized. I think it's just a Black woman. I mean, there's this book by Phumla Gola, that's The Fear Factory, right? Which just states like women are trained. Like there's a factory in how we're trained to fear and how we are trained to police our bodies and to regulate our bodies, right? And I think it happens for all women, don't get me wrong. But I think that for Black women, because the Black body is always a site of violence, regardless of male or female, and particularly for Black women in terms of the rape and the sexual violence that happens on our bodies, I think for Black queer women, what I found is that that fear is front and center. And therefore, I must regulate myself accordingly in public, not to attract any sort of eyes on me. Yet for white women, it's, yeah, the fear exists, but like no one's really going to touch me. And that's because also white supremacy, right? There's a way in which white women, the buffer comes of white supremacy. So that for me was interesting. Hence, and this might be controversial, it is controversial, it might be. Just as a researcher, and I'm saying this as a researcher, I would love to see a good 18 months of LGBTQ violence, particularly like LGBTQ violence in white spaces. I would love to see that. I would love to see, granted, I live in a country with majority Black people. You're going to have majority of us who experience the violence. But I would just love to see violence happen in those spaces, how it gets reported, the narratives that get formed around it, and how it then affects how white women or queer people as a whole move in
Are you
society.
seeing this within South Africa?
Within South Africa.
You would like to see the FLAC lesbian couples get in public and the violence. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
I'd love to see that. Just as a sociological experiment. I do not mean any violence or harm on anyone.
I hear
But
you.
there's something about violence on black bodies and how it occurs and how it's reported and the narratives that are formed, and violence on black bodies.
White
and I would
bodies.
love to see the difference. I'd love to see how it gets. Let's just see white queer people, experience harm.
Even as you're saying it, when I think of corrective rape, this is just an image in my head. I never think of a white person going through
Exactly.
something like that.
Exactly, because there's a way in which, again, the media and how it reports stuff and how black bodies.
Not to say that they don't go through it. I'm just saying the image that pops
Yes.
to mind. I think it's important to
Yes.
make that distinction. Yeah.
And then also, I also, there's this narrative that only violence happens in black spaces. Not true. It also happens in white spaces. And some researchers are doing some amazing work in lifting that up, right? But there's a way in which I think white supremacy regulates us being able to see that. And for me, I would be interested to see. So that was the one finding the many findings that I found. The other important one that I wanted to highlight was I really was chuffed or impressed about the different innovative, thoughtful ways that queer women are occupying space, particularly in Johannesburg, right? And black queer women. So whether it's having events, whether it's having spaces where you can have an event, you can have DJs, whether it's just gathering as a group of women to discuss the trials and tribulations of being queer, I really was impressed by how queer women and black queer women occupy public space. And they're saying that, no, I am as worthy and as of value to be in the space as anybody else, and I'm going to occupy that space, and I'm going to challenge and bring forth my experience and what I face and how it needs to be addressed, whether it is the gender-based violence, whether it is the same-sex violence that happens in intimate relationships, or whether it's about just experiencing some queer joy. I am a proponent of queer joy. I think it is necessary. Part of the narratives of being queer is that it's all just doom and gloom. No, it is a blessing to be a queer person, and we need to be doing more of showing that joy of that. It is such a beauty to be queer and to be black and to be queer. Blessing and a half.
One thing I just want to rehash or revisit is the idea that sexuality, I think you're saying this, and I just want to hear it again if you are. You're saying that some of these things are mimetic desires, like we mimic the era and the climate of what's happening right now. It's almost like it opens the option for you to be bisexual. So because it's promoted is not the right word, but because it's more open than it was in the past, the option then exists in your mind. And so you're saying that, if I'm getting you correctly, you're saying that the idea that you're born this way is incorrect, but more we're shaped by our desires, are influenced.
Yes.
That's what, yeah.
So you are going to have your inherent attractions. There's no denying of that. But even those attractions are being influenced around you. So again, with my participants, I would say to them, when did you recognize that you liked that girl? I don't know, she was wearing a skirt and I thought she was cute. Oh, okay. But then what happened was, I knew that was bad because I was told I mustn't like girls. I must only like boys. So I ended up just liking the boy. He was my boyfriend and this and the other, So for me, the argument that I'm trying to say is that, and it's interesting because we can all understand race as a social construct and gender as a social construct.
You're saying sexuality.
Sexuality is also a social construct.
This is okay.
Sexuality
I didn't want to say that. I wanted you to say it.
So sexuality is actually a social construct because it is more than just, it is your practices, it is your beliefs, it is your desires, it is your attractions. How are those just things that you are born with? Those things are very much so influenced by what is happening around you. Very much so. And if you are not the norm, you're going to face a significant amount of challenge. But there's ways in which you are still experiencing the outside that informs who you are. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. One of the things I want to touch on before we say goodbye is around funding as a researcher. I often think about social scientists. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of funding goes into, the health sciences, the chemical engineers who are trying to save the world, and so, yeah, STEM
Yes.
usually gets the bulk of. So just somebody in a social science space, if you could highlight some of the funding opportunities you've possibly had to progress your research. And if you're saying a lot more work needs to be done, and somebody else who wants to go into social sciences and says, how do you do it? And where should I look?
One, if anybody wants to go into it, being a researcher in general is just going to be a bit of a struggle. You just need to be prepared for the ups and downs of life. It will not be just like a chartered accountant life. You are not going to get that stability. You are going to be going up and down. I think for me, what I really have appreciated in South Africa was that, and particularly when I was studying, there really was an intention to support the humanities and the social sciences work. There really was. So for me, I was funded by the National Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences in South Africa, NIHSS. And there were some other funding that I got, like from the Mellon Grant overseas. And even now there's even NRF. The NRF does really amazing work, and not just looking at sciences, the STEM, but like, humanities and social sciences. So what I want to say is that
I agree. Shout out to the NRF, by the way. Shout out to the NRF.
Yes, no, shout out to the NRF. No, we have to this and the other. And what even happens with the NRF is that a lot of people don't claim those bursaries or those scholarships and this and the other. I fundamentally believe that in South Africa, you are very lucky. You should not be paying for your PhD from your pocket, unless you are going to be engaging in radical, I know somebody was engaging in radical research that like there wasn't really going to be funded, then I can understand that. But there's a way in which you can find funding and this and the other. The tricky part becomes once you then get into the postdoc world, or you come into like wanting to build your own research, right? Like focusing on what's next for me. Like for me, I'm very interested in like looking at queer women in the diaspora, and how it is that like we construct our sexual identities and claim space, and what does healing look like for us, right? For me, what I find is that funding, and it's the time that we're living in now, right, where funding has been frozen, with the USAID and this and the other. But even then, I find that funding becomes very rigid. And its rigidity is about, okay, you got to be focusing on this, and it's got to produce this particular output. But you have some foundations and you have some organizations that are really trying to shift. And they're really trying to embrace this model of being much more flexible. And with humanities, I'm not going to be in a test lab. I'm not going to be doing that work, right? But I'm going to be doing work that really impacts on how we understand society, what influences people to behave this way and the other, and what that can tell us, and how that can inform policy, right? So for me, I think that there really is some really good work that's been done towards that. I mean, I know it's not a popular thing to say now, but you really do have the government and the Department of like Higher Education that really does support this work, but you have to like sift through it. I think as young researchers, it's very hard. You're still viewed as young, you're not as experienced as
That's exactly
older.
where you are. You're like right there.
Yes, I'm at the
You're right
beginning
there.
of that. I'm
Yeah.
an early researcher. You're considered as young, you haven't done enough. And there are some older scholars and researchers who I have looked up to who have supported me in this and the other. But I just wish there were more. I wish there were more that would sit with us and be like, it's rough. It's really rough. Like for me, like what I do now in my paid forward, I do it to PhD students. So I go, you're going to hate it. It's going to be rough, but keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Remember why you started it, this and the other. Even if you just would have just talked to me and vent. I'm here, but keep going. Maybe I know somebody who can maybe help you with your research just to pay it forward, because I know how challenging it was. It was a good challenge. I'm thankful for it, but I know, so I want to pay it forward. I wish more older scholars were doing that. And there's some really are. Those are very close to me are doing that. But funding... It's there. You just got to look for it. It's there. And also it's just, what I hate now, it's like it's specific topics that are interesting, right? Like it's climate, and like how you're going to do climate and gender. Then everybody just rushes their funding towards that. And if you're not there, what are you going to do? Or it's HIV and this and that. And this kind of, it's like the funding frenzy to fund the hot topic. Oh, I can't. I can't. So that's a challenge. Yeah.
Doc, we do need a parting shot.
Okay.
But, just wrapping up with regards to funding and these applications, I know one of the questions is always, impact on community, impact on society. One of the other questions is, how do you plan to disseminate the information? And here you are, you'll be like, I went on a podcast, so please. But so now somebody else is listening and saying, yeah, man, how does your research impact me? If you could speak to that in your parting shot.
I think for me, my research impacts about, one, the writing. Writing is important, contributing to the canon that can be archived of women's stories and queer women's stories. Two, I think that my research impacts, it was so oddly enough. Some random person came up to me and was like, no, I've read your stuff. And like, for me, it's important as a queer woman, and it's great that you're Black. And I mean,
I really don't want to browse over that first point here. I was going to let it go, but I actually think it's really important. No, the whole concept around archives in and of themselves are really important.
Fundamental.
So that a generation, 2-3 generations from now can look back and see insight into what people were thinking about and what communities looked like.
Thank you. And particularly like as Black women.
Yeah.
Not enough is done for us.
Yeah, I wanted to rehash that one because it's such a beautiful
point.
Not
enough is done written about Black women. We have a lot more scholars now who are doing that work. It's like we're all adding our part to it, and I'm very thankful. But let's be honest, we've got a long way to go as compared to others who've written a lot more on this and the other. And for me, I think it just offers us an opportunity to tell it from our perspectives, from us, by us. Historically, we've been written on. Now we get to write about ourselves and what that looks like. And to play a part in that archival work for me is important. I cannot underestimate that work. So thank you for making me flag that one. And then I was going to be saying, I forgot, what was the other question you asked? Sorry.
No, you're doing your parting shots. That was point one. I said, when you look at how do these key findings then impact community, somebody's saying, hey, how does this impact me?
Or impact them.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's the archival work that's very fundamentally important. I had somebody who reached out to me who was like, no, really thank you for this work. But also I think it's for me about occupying space and you seeing me as a representation. And representation is not it's not the last point, but you seeing me as a Black queer woman who has a PhD, who's writing about us, it's important. And so that is the impact, that like you can see yourself in that way. For me, that is the impact. And I really hate the word impact because I can't control that ultimately. Just to be a bit rough, Hitler thought he was impacting the world in a particular way, and then he impacted it very differently, So I always say, like, you can't really you can't really control impact. What you can control is how it is that in your everyday engagement with your research and your everyday writings, what is it that you want to be saying? What is it that you want to be writing? And that for me is about, I want to be documenting the experiences of Black women, Black queer women, what it's like to be living in the global South. And I want to be showing the diversity of all of us. We're not just a monolith that is constantly experiencing this violence. We have a lot of joy, a lot of community, a lot of love. And that needs to be expressed even more. And hopefully that will be the impact. Hopefully. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Doc.
Thank you.
Sure, you've really shared a mouthful with us, but it was a treat. Thank you.
Doc is still very hard for me to hear.
No, and that's why I keep saying it over and over.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.